Normandy, June 1944. I remember the orchard first, the way the damp morning mist clung to the branches, the way the ground stank of wet soil and hot engine oil. Our Shermans sat there like grazing animals after a storm. One crew scrubbed soot from a turret. Another idled their engine to chase the cold out of the block. A third tank was jacked up awkwardly, a wheel hanging loose like a broken limb. Voices drifted across the orchard, low chatter between open hatches, the clank of a tool dropped by a mechanic, an officer muttering into his notebook. For a moment it didn't feel like war. It felt like the kind of morning where a man could almost believe nothing terrible was coming. I was sitting on the hull of a Sherman that had taken a beating 2 nights earlier, my backside cold on the armor plate. My name's Curtis Culin, but most just called me Culin, or Sarge, depending on how formal they felt that day. I had my battered little notebook open, sketching shapes that didn't quite make sense even to me, angles, teeth, strange metal prongs. Nothing anyone would bother looking at. Probably just another one of the mechanic's harebrained ideas. And then the wind shifted. It carried something with it, an odd, muffled exhale, like the earth itself was sighing under its breath. I froze. Everyone did. The orchard went from lazy chatter to a hanging silence. Shadows flickered along the line of hedgerows to our front. Nothing dramatic, just a tremor in the leaves, a quiver in the dirt. But every man present felt the same thing rise in his chest. Something was out there. Something waiting. Something worse than any of us wanted to believe. I closed my sketchbook slowly, the corner of a half-finished drawing pressing against my thumb. Because even before the first shot, before the first tank burned, I knew. The routine was a lie. And the rules we trusted, every single one of them, were about to be shattered. I'd been in France only a handful of days when the truth finally settled in. The landing was the easy part. Everyone back in England had convinced themselves that once we broke the beach line, the whole country would open like a door kicked off its hinges. Tanks would surge inland, infantry riding behind them, and the Germans would scatter before the sheer weight of Allied metal. That fantasy didn't survive 24 hours past the sand. Because here in Normandy the land itself fought back. You have to imagine it. Ancient hedgerows older than any map, walls of earth packed so tight you'd swear they'd grown a spine. Roots like knotted fists. Dirt so dense it turned aside shovels and shells alike. To the folks who lived here they were just boundaries between fields. To us they were fortresses, mile after mile of natural ramparts built long before tanks were ever dreamed of. Every Sherman that tried climbing one of those walls made the same fatal mistake. The nose rose, the belly lifted, and in that single exposed moment, a German with a Panzerfaust didn't even need to aim. One shot. One kill. Every damn time. I saw the fear in the faces of new crews, good men who suddenly understood they were driving straight into a killing ground shaped not by the enemy, but by the countryside itself. The Germans didn't have to be clever. They just had to wait behind those hedges, snug in their holes, listening for our engines to grunt against the slopes. They knew exactly where we'd appear, exactly how long we'd be vulnerable. Command believed numbers and mobility would carry the day. Berlin believed armor and doctrine would stop us cold. Neither side understood the truth we were bleeding out to learn. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a maze. A trap built of roots and soil, sprung anew at every turn. And I felt it, deep in my bones, that every assumption we carried across the channel was cracking. The old rules, the ones we trusted from Africa to Italy, simply didn't apply here. Normandy wasn't going to give us anything. We would have to take every yard. And the cost. God, the cost was only beginning. Command kept insisting the old methods would work. They always do until the war decides otherwise. I remember standing beside my tank, listening to the briefing officer outline the plan with the calm assurance of a man who'd never tried climbing a Normandy hedgerow under fire. Shermans will advance straight up, he said. Infantry will follow. Supporting fire from the flanks will keep enemy positions suppressed. He spoke as if he were reading from a manual for a different continent. Maybe he was. But orders were orders. So we mounted up, engines rumbling through the orchard like nervous breathing. I slid into the hull, closed the hatch, and felt that familiar metal cocoon tighten around me. My hands shook just a little. Not from fear, but from the knowledge that we were about to test a theory the land itself had been disproving all week. We rolled out in a line, tracks chewing through damp soil. As we approached the first hedgerow, the world shrank to the sway of the tank and the rasp of the intercom. The plan said we'd climb, pivot, burst over the crest and pour fire onto whatever lay beyond. But I'd seen enough to know the Germans were already there, waiting. The first Sherman in the column throttled up, nose lifting as its grousers bit into the earthen wall. The engine howled, smoke coughing from its exhaust. For a heartbeat it looked like it might manage it, the bow climbing, treads clawing toward the top. Then the crack came. A single shot. Sharp, close. Light flared on the far side of the hedgerow, a quick orange blossom. The Panzerfaust didn't scream so much as tear the air open, and the explosion turned the Sherman into a lantern of fire. Flames punched out its hatches before anyone inside could react. I swear I heard the driver trying to get the gear out, one last instinct before the heat swallowed him whole. The column froze. No one spoke on the radio. No one breathed. In that instant, every man understood what command had refused to see. The hedgerow hadn't merely stopped the tank, it had betrayed it, lifting its vulnerable belly like an offering. The old rules died with that crew. All our training, all our doctrine, every comfortable assumption, we watched it burn in front of us. And inside my turret, gripping the periscope so tightly my knuckles ached, I felt the truth settle like a stone in my gut. If we kept fighting Normandy the way we fought everywhere else, this place was going to bury us. After that first kill, command tried everything. We all did. Desperation makes improvisers of us all, but Normandy punished improvisation just as harshly as arrogance. Every solution we tried felt like pushing against a wall that wouldn't budge. We tried angling the approach. Come at the hedgerow sideways, one officer said. Make a smaller target. So a Sherman eased toward the wall at a slant, hoping to slip its hull over like a knife sliding under rope. The Germans simply shifted positions, one Panzerfaust team stepping a few paces left, another crawling forward through the roots. The shot hit just as the tank tilted, and the explosion rolled it onto its side. The crew bailed out blind with smoke pouring from their hatches, only to be cut down by rifle fire. We watched powerless. Then infantry tried flanking. God bless them, they fought like men walking into a sawmill. They spread out, hugging shadows, trying to creep along the hedgerows to catch the Germans from the rear. But the Germans had the angles. We heard the bursts, MG-42 fire slicing the morning, and saw bodies left hanging half over the earthen walls, legs twitching as the cries were swallowed by gunfire. Artillery was next. Blast the hedgerows apart, someone said. We shelled them until the field shook. When the smoke cleared, the walls still stood, scarred but intact. Roots thicker than a man's arm held the earth together. Nature had spent centuries weaving them. Our shells barely scratched the surface. Engineers tried explosives. Brave men crawling forward with satchel charges while we laid down covering fire. Sometimes the charges worked, blowing a gap just big enough for a tank to squeeze through. More often the blast left a crater but no opening. And every attempt took minutes we didn't have, minutes in which German mortars rained down like iron hail. Day after day, failure piled up. Crews grew jumpy. A gust of wind from the hedgerow could turn stomachs. Men whispered that the Germans could see through the earth, that they knew every movement we made before we made it. Rumors thrive in places where hope starts to rot. Command finally admitted what we already knew in our bones. It wasn't just the enemy outthinking us. The land itself was their ally. I began to dread every approach to a new hedgerow. The engine would rumble under me, warm and steady, but my hands would slip on the controls from the sweat. Each wall felt like rolling up to the edge of an execution. Normandy wasn't just resisting us. It was devouring us. One tank, one squad, one foolish idea at a time. War isn't strategy. It isn't diagrams or orders or arrows drawn across a map. It's people, scared, bruised, burned, stubborn people, trying to stay alive inside metal that suddenly feels too thin. Normandy taught that lesson with every sunrise. I remember a gunner named Wilkes, quiet kid from Kansas, freckles, polite as a church hymn. One morning his Sherman took a Panzerfaust straight through the bow. When we dragged him out, his hands were melted to the grips of the sighting controls. He kept asking if his crew had made it, even though the compartment behind him was nothing but smoke and silence. He died before we reached the aid station. Drivers staggered from burning hulls with eyebrows singed clean off, coughing black soot, begging God or luck or anybody to give them one more chance not to climb another hedgerow. Medics worked until their hands shook, then tore open their last bandages and kept going with strips of uniform cloth. Sometimes it wasn't enough. Sometimes the screaming stopped not because the pain ended but because the man did. At night, some infantry refused to sleep near the hedgerows, convinced mines or Germans or something worse waited under the roots. I didn't blame them. More than once, I'd catch myself staring at the dark line of a hedge, imagining eyes inside it, patient, motionless, waiting. And in the middle of all this stood me, Curtis Culin, the mechanic who'd fixed more bent armor skirts than he cared to count, the sergeant who'd watched too many crews die exactly the same way. I wasn't a genius. God knows I wasn't even a proper engineer. But I'd reached my limit. I couldn't watch another tank lurch upward like a sacrificial lamb. I couldn't listen to another explosion and think, there goes another crew I probably knew by name. So I started sketching. Little shapes at first. Angles. Odd steel prongs that looked like something a farm machine would wear. I wasn't even sure where the idea came from. Maybe from watching roots tear up tank tracks. Maybe from staring at those damn walls long enough to feel them pressing back at me. People laughed when they saw me hunched over my notebook. Couldn't blame them. A sergeant drawing doodles while tanks burned wasn't exactly inspiring. But I kept at it because deep down I understood something no one else wanted to admit. If we didn't change how we fought, Normandy would grind us into the soil. And my sketches, mad, desperate, half-formed, were the only path I saw that didn't end with another burning Sherman and another letter home. I don't know if you've ever watched an idea come to life under a welding torch, but it's a strange, electric feeling, half birth, half gamble. When the men in the workshop finished bolting those 4 brutal steel prongs onto the nose of our Sherman, even I wasn't sure whether we'd made salvation or suicide. Some officers circled the machine, hands behind their backs, trying to hide their doubt. "Will the welds hold?" one muttered. "Too thin," another said. "The teeth will snap first contact." They weren't wrong to question it. This wasn't designed in a boardroom or tested in some proving ground. It was scrap metal and desperation, hammered into a shape I hoped could punch a hole through hell itself. But we were out of time. So I climbed into the driver's seat of the modified Sherman, my Sherman now, and felt the whole crew holding their breath behind me. The hedgerow loomed ahead, 12 feet high, thick as a fortress wall. We'd lost men trying to climb it. Now we were going to ram it like a battering ram from the Middle Ages. "Forward," I said into the intercom. The engine roared. The tank lurched. The steel prongs hit hard, so hard the impact cracked through my bones. For a heartbeat the tank stopped dead. I thought the officers were right, that my idea was about to scatter across the field in shards of useless metal. Then the roots snapped. They cracked like gunshots, sharp and violent under the hull. The hedgerow groaned as the teeth dug in, ripping through earth and wood like claws tearing cloth. And suddenly, impossibly, we were moving again, pushing, grinding, breaking through. We burst into daylight on the far side, tank rocking forward as the wall split open behind us. A cheer went up from somewhere. I don't even know who yelled first. It didn't matter. In that instant we knew, the hedgerow wasn't a prison. It was just waiting for the right key. The next day we took the design into real combat. German troops had their Panzerfausts ready, expecting the same old dance. The Sherman rising, belly exposed, a perfect kill shot. But this time we didn't climb. We tore straight through the earth, low and level, bursting from the greenery like some beast uncaged. A panther pivoted toward us, turret groaning as it tried to bring its gun to bear. Too slow. Our gunner fired first. One American shell slammed through its side armor, and the German tank folded into fire and smoke. The line buckled. Their confidence shattered. And as the battle roared around us, I felt something I hadn't felt since the beaches. For the first time, Normandy wasn't devouring us. We were carving our way through it. The morning after that first breakthrough, the orchard looked different, not because the hedgerows had changed but because we had. Men who'd spent weeks fearing every mound of earth now eyed the terrain with a kind of hungry curiosity. They'd watched a single Sherman tear apart a wall that had swallowed entire battalions. And once you see a myth bleed, it stops being a myth. Word spread fast, faster than any order could. Crews from other units came by just to lay a hand on the welded teeth, as if touching them might transfer some of the miracle. Officers who'd scoffed at my sketches now asked for measurements. By afternoon, command wanted the design replicated. By nightfall, workshops up and down the line were cutting scrap steel into the same jagged shape I'd scrawled in my notebook. It didn't feel like invention. It felt like revenge finally given form. Within days, modified Shermans moved out in waves. The first time I saw an entire column shred through hedgerows that had stopped us cold for a month, I felt my throat tighten. Dirt flew in plumes. Roots snapped under steel. Where there had once been walls, there were now wounds, wide enough for infantry to pour through, for armor to exploit, for momentum to return to men who'd forgotten what it felt like. Captured German reports later confirmed what we saw on their faces during those fights. Disbelief. Confusion. Then fear. Enemy armor passes through hedgerows without exposing weak points, one report read. Method unknown. Another simply said, the rules have changed. They had. And once the Germans lost the hedgerows, they lost the rhythm of the battlefield. Our advance accelerated. Units that had been pinned for weeks now gained yards by the hour. Tank crews wrote Culin Cutter on their hulls in chalk or white paint. I saw one Sherman driver kiss the steel prongs before rolling out, like they were some kind of talisman. Maybe, in a way, they were. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt tired. Bone tired. The adrenaline of that first breakthrough drained out of me, leaving only the weight of everything that had come before: the burned tanks, the screaming crews, the orchard mornings that smelled like fear and hot oil. When the war finally ended, I went home to New Jersey. Back to my little garage. Back to regular wrenches and regular engines and customers who didn't know my name unless their carburetor needed fixing. Most days I preferred it that way. But sometimes, late at night, I'd think about that moment, the hedgerows splitting, the world opening, the crew cheering behind me. And I knew the truth the history books would never quite spell out. Germany's confidence didn't die in some grand offensive. It died the moment a single Sherman tore a hole through an ancient wall and showed the world that no fortress, man-made or natural, is truly invincible. We changed the battlefield right then. And the war never recovered from it.